I love that quote. With great power comes great responsibility. Does anybody know where that quote comes from? Spider-Man. Okay, this is years ago Spider-Man. This isn't the newest Spider-Man. Okay, this is the Spider-Man that I grew up with, went to and saw. My brother took me back in high school, and loved the movie. And this theme of with great power comes great responsibility kind of plays its way all throughout the movie. Right, as Peter, he's developed these powers, and he's trying to figure out, what to do with them. And his Uncle Ben is sharing with him, okay, you have been given the responsibility now when you have power. And he even, as the movie progresses, and he makes sense of this, and even at the end of the movie, he comes to a place of decision, and he's got to choose something differently, because now he's thinking about the responsibility that comes with the power that he has. See, for us Christians, I think this gets it close, okay? Because the movie is presuming that there are people that don't have power. And for the person who God has redeemed and is following Jesus, we all have power. We have the power of the Holy Spirit. Scripture tells us that the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is alive and at work within us. And so it's not a matter of what do we do with our power. With power comes great responsibility. It's more than that. So I think as we're figuring out what it means to grow young as a church, which is what this series is about, that we want to dive deeper and deeper into what this world is engaging and what this world is saying that it needs, and how we as a church are going to adapt and change with that for us, our proximity brings responsibility. That with our proximity comes responsibility. That where we are planted, matters. What we're going to do with where we are called. Where we're called as a church, where I'm called as an individual at work, where I'm called as a family in my neighborhood. That because of where I'm planted, where I am, I have a responsibility now to do something with that. And for young people today, something that is so important is how to be the best neighbor. Is how do I actually engage with others, with those who are around me. So that's something that we want to lean into and figure out for ourselves. What does it look like to take on this responsibility of our proximity as we neighbor well? I think it's helpful to remember that the idea of neighboring well, of loving others, is not just something that is new to the New Testament. It's not just something that Jesus brought in and said, you know what, it used to be this way, but let me tell you actually how it is. It's actually been something that has been on God's heart from the very beginning. Okay, let me explain. Okay, so here's a little timeline showing you just kind of the story of God. Okay, from creation to the fall, where sin entered in, to Abraham receiving the promise and saying all nations will be blessed through you, to the slavery of Israel, to the exodus out of slavery into the kingdom that God was establishing and building up Israel and giving them the law for rule, for living, into the exile where they were actually pulled out and oppressed by their neighboring countries, to their return to their countries, to now Jesus entering into the scene, building his church, and then one day the new creation. So back in the very beginning, after the fall, the very first sin that we see recorded after the fall is that of Cain and Abel, right? That Cain kills his brother. I'm guessing proximity had a little bit to do with that. Who here ever had a problem with, I'm too close to my neighbor, my sibling, my brother, my sister? Some of you are honest. Awesome. Cain kills Abel. Abel wasn't able to defend himself. It's the only way I remember that, because I always get it confused. But we see what happens, the ramifications of that act. That God looks down on that and goes, well, that wasn't good. Why? Because your brother was made in my image. He's been given intrinsic worth and value. And so when you attack him, when you are against him, you are against me. We can't be against our neighbor. And what does God do? He actually casts Cain out and says, all right, you're gonna wander, and there's going to be this curse on you, and other people are going to recognize who you are because of this mark, because of what you did to your brother. Then we see God calls Abraham and pulls him out of his country and says, I'm actually going to bless everybody else, all the nations, through you. Because God's heart has been, I want to bless the world. It's not just one. It's just that there's one vehicle for the blessing of everyone. But it's always been about blessing everyone. Then we come to the law, the 10 Commandments that God institutes. And we see actually that the commandments can be broken up into two categories. Either things that are about how to have right relationship with God, or how to have right relationship with others. Hey, don't steal. Don't covet. Don't commit adultery. Right? These are about how I interact with my neighbor. And then all throughout Exodus and Leviticus, and especially where it gets kind of dry and boring sometimes because it's just all these laws and whatnot, but you see God's heart for others because he's actually telling the Israelites, hey, care about the poor, care about the neighbor, care about the foreigner among you. Treat them as your own, as your native born. This is all throughout this part of Scripture. And then we get to see Isaiah's heart as he's prophesying and he's doing the work that he's doing. And he says, hey, justice matters, justice for the poor, justice in this world. Zechariah similarly says, administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Don't oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Cares about how we interact with each other, our neighbors. And then Jesus enters the scene. And he says, okay, everything can be summed up by this: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And then there's a story, a parable that he tells as he interacts with an expert in the law that actually unpacks a little bit of what this idea of love your neighbor as yourself is. So if you have your Bible, I'd invite you to turn to Luke chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? It's a good question. What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? So he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Well, you have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. When he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, well, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So he tells this story, right? So we have this man. We don't know who this person is, but he's traveling on the road towards Jerusalem, the common path, common travel route, and he's going along the way just on his business, and some robbers, some thieves come, right, and they start beating him up and wailing on him, and he crumples over, half dead now, robbed and bleeding and broken, unable to move, unable to help himself, just there breathing in the dust of the ground. And then two people, happen to be religious people, they wander through, they're on the same path, and they see this guy, not sure if he's dead. Oh my goodness, I'm seeing a dead body. So, they go around the other side, and, I'm picturing today, we might be like taking the photo, and then, saying, I had such a hard day, I saw a dead body. And I go on my way, because I got things to do. I'm busy, I've got to get to the temple, I've got to go. There's all this other stuff, and I don't have time to help with. Hopefully somebody else will come and do that. But Jesus says, no, it's different than that. This is teaching us that, again, our proximity brings responsibility. Now, how many of us have been in a situation where because we didn't cause it, we don't consider it our responsibility, right? I am guilty all too much of this, of walking by a full garbage can and going, later. Well, I didn't put the last thing in there, so it's not my responsibility to do it, right? Or I didn't drop that piece of garbage on the ground, so why should I have to pick it up? Well, maybe the idea of proximity is, because you're the closest one. So now you're called to do something. And I love that Jesus is actually flipping this whole thing on its head. The guy wanted to justify his lack of action. Say, well, who is my neighbor? I don't have to help them or her or that person over there. And Jesus says, actually, the neighbor, okay, if you want to be a good neighbor, it's about how you neighbor. It's not who is your neighbor. Okay, you are called to be that neighbor. As I was going through this and reflecting on this and this call to mercy and this call to engage with others and where I'm located, God, He convicted me. Because I thought, as I come to this church, especially during the week, because this is my work week, and I show up on Monday, have I ever, in the 2.5 years that I've been here, actually walked the sidewalks of the houses around this church, looking to maybe get to know somebody, looking to see somebody out on their front lawn, looking to meet somebody who's at the bus stop that's right by our church, to say, I want to get to know you. I want to get to know the neighborhood where my church, where this family gathers to meet. Our proximity brings our responsibility. How many of us have done that in our own neighborhoods? To say, I want to be intentional about getting to know my neighbors. Okay, if you're anything like me, it's really easy to just pull into the driveway, go right into the door. In fact, a lot of us pull right into our garages and go right inside, right? Because it's so easy now to not actually engage with those around us. Here at Westside, though, we want to begin to change that. Now, there's some things that we've been doing, actually, to live into this already, some really, really good things. There's been things like teaching English as a second language that we've been offering to this community now for years because we want to help them and meet needs that really matter to people and let them know that we care. We've been doing tutoring for a while. We've got Basic, the middle school program on Wednesday nights. I love this. We have probably 8, 9, 10 kids who just ride their scooters from the neighborhood and come because there's a meal and then there's a gathering of people who are like them. They get to come and have fun. We had 17 kids this last Wednesday night for middle school. And when we don't have a meal on Wednesday, they're still riding their scooters because they're looking for that community and the food. We've started, though, to take it off the campus, because those are examples of things that we're doing here, but we've started to actually go, how do we do it there, into our community? And so, how many of you participated with us at the Marcus Whitman Carnival, end of summer carnival that we had there in August? Awesome, great job. Wasn't that so life-giving to just step into this call to be a neighbor and to care about the community and to provide life and to give backpacks to kids who need it as they're entering into school? It was so fantastic. And there's other things that we're looking to do as well. One of the things that I'm most excited about is something called Light in the Night, which usually is a children's ministry event that is geared towards children and their families to come and be blessed on Halloween night and say, we're going to just share with you the light and love of Jesus on this night, give you an alternative maybe to some other things. And we're thinking we need to actually blow this up bigger than just children's ministry. This needs to be an event that is for the whole community, much like Marcus Whitman, okay? So we're talking about like getting floodlights and opening up the parking lot and having booze in the parking lot and having lights actually shining into the sky and saying, hey, there's light in the night. And so come and engage, okay? Wear a sweater, come and have fun, okay? And if you hosted a booth, we'd love for you maybe to host that same booth at Light in the Night. To say we want to bless our community. And my good friend Leroy spent like the last 3 days traveling around and asking people for cardboard because we're going to build a cardboard box maze as big as this room. It's going to be awesome because we want to bless our community and say, come and let's just fellowship. And maybe you can see the gospel in action when you come among us. But still the question that comes through my mind is this. When our cars pull into the parking lot, are we easily sidestepping our neighbor who's been victimized by divorce, by drugs, by disease, by who knows what else? Now, I'm not saying that we need to go and knock on every single door and try to meet everybody and say, hey, I'm here to bless you. That's not what I'm saying. We don't need to know everyone, but we can diversify who we know, who we spend our time with. Okay, as we engage with people, there is more value. Young people today, this matters so much to them. As we think about diversifying, there is more value in dialogue and process than in statements and conclusions. The young people today, conclusions matter. Yes, it's important what side you're on, but what's more important is the process to get there. Is they want to actually have a conversation and dialogue. Okay, journey with me in this. Okay, I don't want to just, you're there and you're trying to convince me of your position, and I'm here and I'm just trying to convince you of my position. Can I actually approach a conversation and say, you know what? I'm willing to revise my position as I engage with you because I'm about you and I'm for you. Even if I'm not for what you're for, I'm for you as a person. I had a conversation with a good friend just a week and a half ago at Barracuda. We were talking about an issue related to theology and the church, and I kept wanting to peg him down. It sounds like you land on this side of the conversation, okay? That you're over here, and I knew that I was over here on this side, and I kept wanting to ask him, okay, well, where are you? What do you actually believe? But we just kind of kept talking, and I learned by the end of the conversation, because he kind of did share, well, I think I'm over here, but his heart was so much for this other issue and just empathizing with the other issue that I think I would have ruined the conversation had I just tried to grab him and say, this is what you believe. The dialogue was so much better. See, young people today, they're asking questions like this. What does your dinner table look like? This is a quote from a young man that you can read about if you're following along in the book, the Growing Young book, which we have copies available, I believe. It says this. He says, the gospel is to love the people in your neighborhood, at work, and at the gym. Those are the people we're asked to engage with as we live out the gospel. At our church, we're asked, what does your dinner table look like? Who are you inviting into your home? Life change comes when your table has people who are different from you. Who am I fellowshipping with? Do they just look like me and think like me and act like me and believe like me? Or maybe, can I diversify a little bit and invite some people who are a little bit different from me in age, ethnicity, orientation, background, belief, you name it. Can I engage with them because God has called me to be a neighbor, to be a witness of His love and mercy into the world? Now, as we do this, there's the difficulty is that whenever you invite diversity, you invite complexity, right? And as we're talking about being more intergenerational as a church, we want to value the kids all the way up through the older members in our church and say every generation matters. We want to be together, not just siloed off into our individual demographics. It's important to understand the differences in the way that we approach some of these things, okay? Especially across the ages. See, the founders, they cared about responsibility. And the boomers wanted to know, is it true? Is there truth in that? Is it right? Gen Xers care about, is it authentic or real? They want transparency. And as we're still understanding millennials, the question that we think maybe represents them is it beautiful? Is it good? And so as I engage with people of different backgrounds, different ages, can I go, okay, you know what, they're coming at this wanting to know what's true, while I'm coming at it from this wanting to know what's beautiful. And can I engage, and can I care about the conversation and not just about the conclusion? Can I put myself in somebody else's shoes to engage with them instead of just convince them? As we figure out how to do this, to engage our world. I love what Ralph did last week. If you were here last week, Ralph gave us a graph describing high connection versus with high distinction. The idea that we're called to be in our world, right? And I prefer to say that we're called to be with our world. Because for me, with is the idea of both being in the world but not of the world. I'm connecting with it, but I'm also called to be different from it. I'm with the world, and so I'm going to connect. I'm going to know people. I'm going to engage. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to love them where they're at. But there's also some things where I got to go, I'm following Jesus in the midst of this, and so while I love you and I'm for you, I'm not for that. I don't know about that. I've got to be still here and follow Jesus in obedience. And so when we have the two blended together, we are the best neighbors. But it's still difficult sometimes to figure out that balance of how do I engage? Okay, I think I know kind of how to follow Jesus, but sometimes I don't know how to follow him into the world. Because there's things in this world that I don't understand, that are different, they're hard. And so I want to give you 3 words that maybe can be a help for us as we think about connecting with others and being with our world. Okay? And that is to reject, redeem, or reuse. As I process that latest song, as I'm engaging in that conversation, as I'm watching that movie, is it something that I need to reject? Because I say, you know what, that is anti-gospel. That is anti-who Jesus is. But the reality, I think, is that we often want to just jump to reject or reuse. And there's probably a few more things that we need to think about. How do I redeem this? Hey, because you know what? It's got parts of the gospel in it. There's some beautiful things in it. There's some good in it. And so I need to redeem this and actually show, okay, you know what? The gospel's missing here, but let me tell you about where this is actually hitting the point. Paul does this beautifully when he goes to Athens and he actually says, hey, you've got an idol to an unknown God? Well, an unknown God, we'd go reject. But he goes, I want to redeem that. Let me tell you about the unknown God that you're worshiping. And then there are things in life that we can just reuse. Hey, that's beautiful. That's praiseworthy. That's excellent. That's godly. That's the gospel in action. But if we're going to engage in this world, in this current culture and climate, there's another word that I want to give you. It starts with an R because pastors love their alliteration. It's the idea of restoration. Author Gabe Lyons says this: if you don't understand restoration, you won't understand the next Christians. They see themselves on a mission, partnering with God to breathe justice and mercy and peace and compassion and generosity into the world. To restore things that are broken? Why didn't the priest and the Levite in Jesus' example, why didn't they actually engage and show compassion and mercy? Was it because they were just too busy? Was it because they were worried about, well, I become unclean then, and so I'd have to do these other things, and it's going to cost me my time? Were they afraid of getting their hands dirty? So we can't restore anything that's broken if we're not willing to touch it. And that's the beauty of the gospel. That we have a God different from us, who loved us enough to come down into our brokenness and touch the place where it hurts the most. To touch the cracks and the tears and the dirt in our lives, to say, I love you enough that I want to actually share this love with you, no matter the cost. And so, that's the example for us. That God has filled us with his power to do that, to go and breathe this kind of life and mercy and justice and goodness into the lives of those that we meet. We have that power. It's not a matter of power. It's a matter of where am I? And if you're an introvert like me, the idea of going and talking to a neighbor or somebody new is terrifying. But maybe it's important that you just lean into the familiar. Create a habit where you're going to the same place and you see the same person, okay, and you get to know their name over the 3 months it might take you, but hey, that's taking a step, okay? And as an introvert, that's like success. I learned their name. Maybe can I be intentional with my neighbors instead of just being inside my house? Can I try to maybe do some yard work while I see them out doing yard work also? Because I want to try to see if I can just foster relationship. Because I just want to care about somebody else. Can we lean into some of these practices and ideas, both as a church and as individuals? But as a church, let me cast a picture for you a little bit of what this means for us and where we want to go. That our next steps at Westside, that we want and we will seek to make a difference in our community. We've already started doing that with Marcus Whitman and ESL and some other great things. We want to continue to do that, to say we're here and we want to actually breathe mercy and justice into our community, right here. And then as we do that, we want to be gracious as we wrestle towards obedience to Christ. Because we come at it from different angles and different approaches. But it's the same God and the same Spirit. And so we need to be grace-filled as we do this. We will embrace diversity. Whether that's age, whether that's skin color, whether that's background, belief system, we want to embrace the diversity of God's kingdom here on the earth. And while we're doing all this, you know what's going to happen? We're going to fail. We're not committing to fail. We're just recognizing that we will fail. We will fail and we will learn. If you were here several weeks ago, Ralph shared a video from Will Smith talking about there's a right kind of failure, a failure that actually moves us forward in life. We want to fail forward, okay? We want to try things and experience them and say, okay, that was good. Could be better. Hey, that wasn't good. We're not going to do that again. As we do this, we want to create more than we critique. We want to innovate. We want to try new ministries, new things. Our theology isn't going to change, but our methodology, our approach may change as we create new opportunities and new relationships and new things to engage new people with the gospel and love of Jesus Christ. And we will experiment. We're going to try something new. If you got an idea, we want to hear it because we want to continue to try new things, to love our neighbors well, to grow young as a church and be relevant in this culture and community. But what about for you? What does this mean for you as you think about neighboring well? Well, there's a word that I want to give you, and it's probably the most important word. It's just the word listen. That listening matters so much. It's actually one of the first things that we tell our adult volunteers who come into the youth ministry is you need to listen more than you talk. Because when I listen well to somebody else, I'm communicating to them they have worth and value. They have a story worth being heard. Got to listen, ask good questions. If you want ideas for how to ask some good questions that don't just lead to yes or no, come talk with me. I'm just in the student ministry, guess what? It's easy to go yes or no. So we've had to get creative about how to ask different kinds of questions, okay? To form and create dialogue. Next, diversify your contacts. How many of us, if we pulled out our phone right now, and we looked through our last 10, 15 messages or phone calls, how many of those people would look different or think different or act different or believe different than us? See, we like the familiar. But maybe we need to get outside of our bubbles a little bit. So is there an acquaintance you have or a friend that you haven't talked with them in a long time that it would be good for you to actually reach out to and say, hey, let's just grab coffee. I want to know what's going on in your life. And you know that it's going to be interesting because they're different. I encourage you maybe to do that this week. I love this one. You could listen to current songs or at least Google the lyrics and read them. Because if the top song on the chart has sold 200 million copies, that says something about what our world is caring about right now, about a need that is going on in the world. And so could I take the time to listen or to read those lyrics and say, what does this tell me about my neighbor? What does this tell me about the world that I'm in? Where is the gospel in this? Where is the gospel missing? What need is being met or not being met that the gospel could be meeting? If I could think critically and ask those questions, I could better understand and engage with those I come into contact with. And finally, don't be afraid to speak up and step up, especially if you are here and you're under the age of 30. We need your perspective. We need your way of looking at the world and the questions that you ask and your creativity and your energy, okay? So when you see something that doesn't sit right with you, come talk to us. Step up. Speak up. We need your voice. See, the reality of all of this that we're talking about this morning, about neighboring well, about the parable of the Good Samaritan, it all comes down to really one idea, and that's the idea of sacrificial love. That the neighbor who neighbors well in the way that Jesus has called us to, in the way that represents God's heart, is going to be the neighbor who's willing to sacrifice. And when we hear stories of that kind of sacrificial love from people in our world, we're transfixed by that. When we see an image of somebody jumping out of a helicopter to go rescue somebody who's drowning, we're drawn to that. Jesus on the cross is the full embodiment of that kind of love, of that kind of neighboring. And he's calling us, yes, to be the Good Samaritan, to be willing to sacrifice, to care for somebody. But we often relate to the Good Samaritan, and I'm not so sure that's true. Because I think in this story, we first have to understand that we're the victim. That this world has broken me and has cracked me and wants to defeat me. And there's nothing that I can do to pick myself up off of this ground. I need somebody to care and to come and to bandage my wounds and to carry me to an inn and to take care of me and to let it cost him so that I can be restored. Before I can be the good neighbor, I have to recognize first that I've been the victim. And as a victim, broken by the world, we get to come to this table. This table that represents restoration, that represents a God who himself was broken for us, to heal us, and redeem us, and love us. I'm going to invite the servers to come forward now.